The icy waters of the Snake River churned violently as Clara Valdez plunged beneath the surface, her lungs burning for air while the shouts of men echoed from the riverbank behind her. It was May of 1875, and death seemed certain either by bullet or by drowning until a strong hand gripped her arm, yanking her toward the opposite shore with surprising force. "You're safe on this side," a deep voice assured her as she coughed up river water, her vision clearing to reveal a tall man with intense eyes the color of whiskey. "They won't cross into Wyoming territory, not with the sheriff watching this crossing." Clara could barely speak, her sodden dress weighing her down as the stranger, a cowboy, judging by his worn leather chaps and dusty hat, helped her to her feet. Behind them, 3 men stood at the opposite bank, their figures growing smaller as the cowboy led her away. "Thank you," she managed between ragged breaths. "They would have killed me." The cowboy's expression hardened as he glanced back toward the river. "Name's Yates Odell. Got a camp not far from here. Can get you dry and fed before we figure what's next." Clara hesitated, looking back at the men who were now mounting their horses on the Idaho side of the river. She had escaped the immediate danger, but she was still a woman alone in unfamiliar territory with a man she didn't know. Yet something in his steady gaze told her she could trust him. "Clara Valdez," she replied, wringing water from her hair. "I'm grateful for your help, Mr. Odell." What Clara didn't tell him was that the men pursuing her were not ordinary outlaws, but hired guns working for the most powerful man in Cherry Creek, Nevada, a man who had promised to hunt her to the ends of the earth for what she had witnessed. A man who would not stop until she was silenced forever. "We should move quickly," Yates said, leading her toward a dun-colored horse grazing nearby. "Nightfall's coming and you're shaking like an aspen leaf." As Yates helped her onto his horse and they began their journey away from the river, Clara couldn't help but wonder if this unexpected rescuer was a blessing or merely a brief reprieve, before her past caught up with her once again. The cowboys' camp was simple but well situated beneath a stand of cottonwood trees, offering protection from both the elements and prying eyes. Yates worked efficiently, building a fire and retrieving a blanket from his saddlebags. "It's not much, but it's dry," he said, handing Clara the blanket while carefully averting his eyes from her clinging dress. "I'll turn around while you get out of those wet things. Can offer you a spare shirt if you'd like." "That would be kind," Clara replied, suddenly acutely aware of her vulnerability. As Yates busied himself with the horse, she quickly peeled off her outer dress, wrapping the blanket around herself before slipping on the offered shirt. It engulfed her small frame, but it was blessedly dry. "May I ask why those men were chasing you?" Yates questioned once she was decent, feeding small branches into the growing fire. His face remained neutral, but Clara could see the curiosity in his eyes. Clara hesitated. Trust was a luxury she couldn't afford, not after what had happened in Cherry Creek. Yet this man had saved her life, and she owed him some explanation. "I saw something I shouldn't have," she finally said. "In Cherry Creek, a murder committed by a man everyone believes to be respectable." Yates's eyebrow raised slightly. "Cherry Creek, Nevada, that's Harlan Pierce's territory," Clara's breath caught. "You know of him?" "Every cowhand west of the Mississippi knows Pierce," Yates replied, his expression darkening. "Got more money than God and a mean streak to match. Owns half the county, from what I hear." "He owns more than that," Clara said softly. "He owns the sheriff, the judge, and most of the businesses. And now he wants me dead because I saw him kill a miner who refused to sell his claim." Yates was silent for a long moment, poking at the fire. "Those men who were chasing you, Pierce's men," Clara nodded. "They've been on my trail for 3 days. I thought I'd lost them until this morning." The river crossing into Wyoming was smart, Yates acknowledged. Pierce doesn't have much pull with the territorial authorities here. Not yet, anyway. It wasn't planned, Clara admitted. I was desperate. Yates handed her a tin cup of coffee, the warmth seeping into her cold hands. Well, Miss Valdez, seems you've found yourself in quite a situation. What's your plan now? I don't have one, she confessed. I was a schoolteacher in Cherry Creek. I have some savings, but… She trailed off, the enormity of her predicament weighing heavily upon her. A schoolteacher? Yates seemed surprised. Is that so difficult to believe? Clara asked, a hint of defensiveness in her tone. Not at all, he replied. Just thinking that Cherry Creek's children are going to miss their education. Despite everything, Clara found herself smiling slightly. They'll manage. There's a woman there, Mrs. Thornton, who can step in, if she hasn't already. Night was falling in earnest now, the Wyoming wilderness coming alive with nocturnal sounds. Yates moved with the easy confidence of a man accustomed to life outdoors, preparing a simple meal of beans and salt pork. We should rest here tonight, he said as they ate. Tomorrow I can take you to Laramie. You might be able to find passage east from there. East? Clara hadn't considered going that far. Pierce has connections throughout the territories, Yates explained. If you're serious about staying alive, distance is your friend. Clara stared into the fire, contemplating the idea of leaving the West entirely. It had been her home since she was 18, when she'd traveled from Boston to take up the teaching position. 6 years building a life, now gone in an instant. What about you? She asked. What brings a cowboy to this crossing? Yates's expression shifted slightly, becoming more guarded. I'm heading to the cattle auction in Cheyenne. Got a string of horses to sell for the ranch I work for. You're a long way from the main trail, Clara observed. I know these parts well, he said simply. Sometimes the less traveled path is safer. There was more to his story, Clara was certain, but she didn't press. Everyone in the West had secrets, she understood that better than most. As the night deepened, Clara found herself staring up at the stars, wrapped in Yates's spare bedroll while he took first watch. Despite her exhaustion, sleep eluded her. Every snap of a twig sent her heart racing, imagining Pierce's men had somehow found her. They won't cross the river tonight, Yates said quietly, as if reading her thoughts. Try to rest. How can you be so sure? Clara asked. Because men like that are cowards at heart, he replied, his voice tinged with something that sounded like personal experience. They won't risk unfamiliar territory in the dark. Clara turned to look at him, his profile illuminated by the dying firelight. You speak as though you've encountered men like Pierce before. Yates was silent for a long moment. Let's just say I understand how men with power operate. And the lengths they'll go to keep it. Clara wanted to ask more, but something in his tone suggested the subject was closed. Instead, she said, Thank you again, Mr. Odell. Not many would have helped a stranger in trouble. Yates, he corrected. And you'd be surprised what some folks might do when they see someone in need. Not in my experience, Clara murmured, thinking of how the people of Cherry Creek had averted their eyes when Pierce's influence became apparent, how quickly they'd turned on her when she'd tried to speak up about what she'd witnessed. Then you've been keeping the wrong company, Yates replied, his voice softening. Get some sleep, Clara. Tomorrow will come soon enough. For the first time since fleeing Cherry Creek, Clara felt something close to security. As she drifted off to sleep, she wondered about the enigmatic cowboy who had pulled her from the river, and whether their paths crossing had been mere chance or something more like fate. Dawn broke clear and cool over the Wyoming landscape. Clara awoke to find Yates already up, brewing coffee over a fresh fire. She was struck again by his quiet efficiency, the way he moved with purpose but without wasted effort. Morning, he greeted her, offering a cup of the strong black coffee. "How'd you sleep?" "Better than I expected," she admitted, accepting the cup gratefully. Her clothes had dried overnight, though they were wrinkled and stained from her journey. She'd managed to clean up a bit in the early light, washing her face in a nearby stream and combing her fingers through her tangled hair. "We should reach Laramie by nightfall if we ride steady," Yates said, saddling his horse. "Unless you need more rest," Clara shook her head. "I've rested enough. The sooner we reach civilization, the better." Yates helped her onto his horse before mounting behind her. The proximity was unavoidable, but not uncomfortable. Clara found herself aware of his steady presence at her back, the way his arms created a protective frame around her as he held the reins. As they rode, the landscape gradually changed from the river valley to rolling hills dotted with sagebrush and the occasional stand of pines. Yates proved to be knowledgeable about the territory, pointing out landmarks and sharing bits of information about the wildlife they encountered. "Have you always been a cowboy?" Clara asked as they paused to rest the horse near midday. "Since I was 16, Yates replied, helping her down. "Started as a wrangler on a ranch outside of Denver, and before that, a shadow passed over Yates's face. Was raised by my grandfather after my parents died. He was a blacksmith in Missouri." "I'm sorry about your parents," Clara said softly. Yates shrugged, though Clara could tell the casual gesture belied deeper feelings. "It was a long time ago. Cholera took them both when I was 10. Clara nodded, understanding loss too well herself. "My mother died when I was young too. My father raised me alone in Boston until I was 18. "What brought you west?" Yates asked, offering her a strip of jerky from his saddlebag. "Adventure, I suppose," Clara said with a small smile. "And the promise of independence. The Cherry Creek mining boom meant they needed a schoolteacher and I had the qualifications." Her smile faded. "It was a good life until Pierce," Yates finished for her. Clara nodded. "It happened 2 weeks ago. I was gathering wildflowers for my classroom when I heard voices from a nearby ravine. Pierce and his men had cornered Samuel Wilson, a miner who'd found a promising claim. They wanted him to sell, but he refused." Her voice grew tight. "Pierce shot him in cold blood, then ordered his men to make it look like an accident. They never knew I was there watching. But later, when Wilson's death was ruled an accident, I couldn't stay silent." "You went to the sheriff," Yates guessed. "I tried," Clara confirmed. "Sheriff Benton listened, then told me to forget what I'd seen if I valued my life. The next day, my home was ransacked, and I found a note warning me to leave town or join Wilson." Yates's expression hardened. "So you ran?" "Not immediately," Clara said, surprising him. "First, I went to the territorial newspaper office in the next town over. I wrote down everything I'd seen, everything I knew about Pierce's operations. The editor promised to publish it once I was safely away." Admiration flickered in Yates's eyes. "That was brave, or foolish," Clara replied. "Pierce's men caught up with me faster than I expected. They've been hunting me ever since." They resumed their journey, the sun climbing higher in the sky. Clara found herself studying Yates when he wasn't looking, the strong line of his jaw beneath several days' worth of stubble, the way his hands handled the reins with practiced ease, the quiet alertness in his posture. "You're watching me," he noted without turning his head, surprising her. Clara felt heat rise in her cheeks. "I'm trying to figure you out, Mr. Odell. And what have you concluded?" There was a hint of amusement in his voice. "That you're a man who prefers to keep his own counsel," she replied honestly, "and that there's more to your story than you've shared." Yates was silent for a moment. "You're observant, Miss Valdez." "I'm a schoolteacher," she reminded him. "Observing is part of the job. They crested a hill and Yates reined in the horse suddenly, his body tensing. Following his gaze, Clara spotted a plume of dust rising from the trail ahead, indicating riders approaching. "Get down," Yates said urgently, helping her dismount before leading the horse into a grove of trees for cover. "Stay quiet." They watched as a group of 5 riders passed on the trail below, moving at a steady pace. Clara's heart pounded as she recognized 2 of the men who had chased her into the river the day before. "How?" she whispered, panic rising in her throat. "How did they find us?" Yates's expression was grim. "They must have crossed downriver and picked up our trail this morning. They're heading toward Laramie," Clara realized with growing dread. "They'll cut us off." Yates nodded, his mind clearly working through their options. "We'll have to change course, head north instead." "To where?" "I know a place," Yates said after a moment of consideration. "A ranch about 30 miles north of here. The owner's an old friend who won't ask too many questions." "Can we trust him?" Yates corrected. "And yes, with your life." They waited until Pierce's men were well out of sight before emerging from their hiding place. Yates helped Clara back onto the horse, but this time he mounted with a new urgency. "We'll have to ride hard," he warned her. "Hold tight." As they set off in a new direction, Clara couldn't help but wonder if she'd only succeeded in pulling Yates into her dangerous situation. The thought troubled her more than she expected. "You don't have to do this," she said as they rode. "You've already done more than enough. You could point me in the right direction and continue on your way." Yates glanced back at her, surprise evident in his expression. "And leave you to fend off 5 armed men alone? What kind of man do you take me for?" "A sensible one," Clara replied. "This isn't your fight." "Maybe it is," Yates said enigmatically. "Maybe I've been looking for a reason to settle accounts with men like Pierce for longer than you know." Before Clara could question him further, Yates urged the horse into a gallop, ending the conversation as they raced across the open Wyoming landscape. The sun was low on the horizon when they finally approached a modest ranch nestled in a valley protected by surrounding hills. A small but well-maintained house stood near a barn and corral where several horses grazed. Smoke rose from the chimney, indicating someone was home. As they rode into the yard, the front door opened, and a woman emerged, a rifle held casually but competently in her hands. She was perhaps 40, with streaks of gray in her dark hair and the weathered complexion of someone who spent most of her life outdoors. "That you, Yates Odell?" she called, lowering the rifle slightly. "Thought you'd be halfway to Cheyenne by now." "Change of plans, Martha," Yates replied as he dismounted and helped Clara down. "We need a place to lie low for a night or 2. Martha's sharp eyes assessed Clara, taking in her disheveled appearance and the way she stayed close to Yates. "Trouble, the kind that rides with guns and a mean disposition," Yates confirmed. Martha sighed as if this wasn't the first time Yates had brought complications to her door. "Well, don't just stand there. Come on in before you catch your death." Inside, the ranch house was simple but comfortable, with hand-braided rugs covering the plank floors and sturdy, well-used furniture. A fire crackled in the hearth, and the smell of stew bubbled from a pot hanging over the flames. "Martha Jensen," the woman introduced herself to Clara, extending a calloused hand. "This is my place." "Clara Valdez," Clara replied, shaking Martha's hand. "I appreciate your hospitality." "Any friend of Yates is welcome here," Martha said, though her expression remained appraising. "Though he usually warns me when he's bringing company." "It wasn't planned," Yates explained, removing his hat and running a hand through his hair. "Clara's being hunted by Harlan Pierce's men." Martha's eyebrows shot up. "Harlan Pierce, the mining baron from Nevada," Clara nodded. "I witnessed him commit murder." Martha let out a low whistle. "You certainly know how to pick him, Yates," She turned to Clara. "No offense intended, miss." "None taken," Clara assured her. "You both look like you could use a hot meal and a wash," Martha observed. "Clara, there's a washroom off the kitchen. I'll find you some clean clothes. They might be a bit large, but they'll do. Yates, you know where everything is." As Martha bustled about, preparing for her unexpected guests, Clara noticed the easy familiarity between her and Yates. There was history there, though not of the romantic kind from what she could tell. Later, after they had washed and changed into clean clothes, the three of them sat around Martha's table eating bowls of venison stew and cornbread. Clara's borrowed dress, evidently belonging to Martha, hung loosely on her smaller frame, but it was clean and comfortable. "So," Martha said once they had eaten their fill, "what's your plan now?" Yates and Clara exchanged glances. "We haven't gotten that far," Yates admitted. "Pierce's men were on the road to Laramie. They're cutting off the obvious escape routes." Martha nodded thoughtfully. "You could head north to the Dakota Territory. Pierce doesn't have much influence up there, from what I hear." "I was thinking the same," Yates agreed. "But we'll need supplies for a longer journey, and possibly a second horse." "You can have whatever you need," Martha said without hesitation. "I owe you that much, Yates." Clara looked between them curiously. "You two have known each other a long time." A moment of silence passed before Martha spoke. "Yates saved my husband's life during the war, and then he saved mine when James died and the bank tried to take this ranch." "Martha exaggerates," Yates said, looking uncomfortable with the praise. "I just helped with some legal paperwork." "And threatened the banker with bodily harm if he didn't honor James's veteran status," Martha added with a wry smile. "Don't play modest, Yates. It doesn't suit you." Clara was beginning to see that there was much more to Yates Odell than the quiet cowboy who had pulled her from the river. "You fought in the war?" she asked. Yates nodded reluctantly. "Union cavalry. That's where I met James Jensen." "And studied law, apparently," Clara observed. "For a time," Yates acknowledged. "Before I decided I preferred horses to people." Martha snorted. "What he means is before he decided he was too principled to practice law the way his firm wanted him to." Yates shot Martha a look that suggested she was revealing more than he was comfortable sharing. Martha merely shrugged, unrepentant. "You should rest," Yates said to Clara, clearly changing the subject. "We'll have another long day tomorrow." "I'll make up the guest room," Martha offered, rising from the table. Later that night, unable to sleep despite the comfortable bed, Clara found herself drawn to the window. The moon cast silver light over Martha's ranch, illuminating the barn and corrals. Movement caught her eye. Yates, walking toward the barn, his figure a dark silhouette against the moonlit landscape. Curiosity got the better of her. Wrapping a shawl around her shoulders, Clara slipped quietly from the house and followed him. The barn was dimly lit by a single lantern when she entered. Yates stood at one of the stalls, speaking softly to Martha's horses. He turned at the sound of her footsteps, his hand instinctively moving toward his gun before he recognized her. "You should be sleeping," he said, though there was no reprimand in his tone. "So should you," Clara countered, moving closer. "What are you doing out here?" "Checking the horses," Yates replied, turning back to the bay mare who was nosing at his hand. "Making sure we're ready to leave at first light." Clara studied him in the lantern light, seeing the tension in his shoulders. "That's not all, though, is it?" Yates was silent for a moment. "No," he finally admitted. "I'm worried about what happens when Pierce's men realize we've changed course." "They won't give up easily." "You could still walk away from this," Clara said softly. "This isn't your fight." Yates turned to face her fully. "Why do you keep saying that?" "Because it's true," Clara insisted. "You've already risked enough for a stranger." "Is that what you think you are?" "A stranger?" Yates asked, his voice low. After everything we've shared these past 2 days, Clara didn't know how to respond. It was true that their circumstances had created a bond between them, the kind that forms quickly in times of danger. But it was more than that, and they both knew it. "I don't want you hurt because of me," she finally said. Yates stepped closer, the lantern light catching the amber flecks in his eyes. "Clara, I made my choice when I pulled you from that river. I'm not walking away now." "Why?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. For a moment, Yates seemed to struggle with his answer. Then, with quiet intensity, he said, "Because sometimes life gives you a chance to stand for something or someone worth fighting for, and you'd be a fool to turn your back on that." Clara felt her heart quicken at his words, at the earnestness in his expression. Without thinking, she reached out, placing her hand on his arm. "Thank you," she said simply, knowing the words were inadequate for what she felt. Yates covered her hand with his own, the touch sending warmth through her despite the cool night air. For a long moment they stood that way, connected by more than the danger they faced together. Finally, Yates cleared his throat. "We should both get some rest. Dawn comes early." Clara nodded, reluctantly withdrawing her hand. As they walked back to the house together, she couldn't help but wonder what might happen once they were free of Pierce's shadow, if such a time would ever come. The next morning, they departed Martha's ranch with the first light of dawn. Martha had provided them with a second horse, a sturdy gray gelding for Clara, along with supplies to last several days on the trail. The farewell between Yates and Martha spoke volumes about their friendship, with Martha extracting a promise from Yates to return safely. "And bring her back with you," Martha had added quietly, with a meaningful look that made Clara wonder what exactly the older woman had perceived between them. They rode north, keeping to less traveled paths that Yates knew from his years of working cattle in the territory. Clara found herself growing more comfortable on horseback as the hours passed, grateful for the independence of riding her own mount rather than sharing with Yates, despite the strange sense of loss she felt without his steady presence at her back. "You ride well for a schoolteacher," Yates observed as they paused to rest the horses near midday. "My father insisted I learn," Clara explained, accepting the canteen Yates offered. He believed a proper education included physical skills as well as book learning. "A progressive thinker," Yates noted with approval. "He was," Clara agreed, smiling at the memory. "A professor of natural philosophy at Harvard. He scandalized his colleagues by teaching me mathematics and Latin alongside my more feminine studies. And he let you come west alone." "He died the winter before I left," Clara said softly. "There was nothing keeping me in Boston after that." Yates's expression softened. "I'm sorry." "Thank you," Clara replied. "It was peaceful, at least, not like—" She trailed off, thinking of Samuel Wilson's violent end. "Not like what Pierce did to Wilson," Yates finished, his jaw tightening. "Men like Pierce think they can take whatever they want without consequence. You sound like you have personal experience with such men." Yates was quiet for a moment, seeming to debate how much to share. "My grandfather's smithy was taken by a man like Pierce after the war, a railroad magnate who wanted the land for expansion. When my grandfather refused to sell, there was a fire, officially ruled an accident." Clara's heart ached at the parallel to her own situation. "That's why you became a lawyer," Yates nodded. "I was young and idealistic enough to believe the law could bring justice." His expression darkened. "I learned otherwise quickly enough." "What happened?" "I discovered that the firm I joined was more interested in helping wealthy clients bend the law than in upholding it," Yates explained. "The final straw came when they represented the very man who had driven my grandfather to ruin." He shook his head. "I left law practice the next day and never looked back." "Until you helped Martha keep her ranch," Clara observed. Yates's mouth quirked in a half-smile. That was different, that was personal. They rode on as the day progressed, the landscape becoming more rugged as they ventured into less settled territory. By late afternoon, dark clouds had gathered on the horizon, promising rain. "We should find shelter before that storm hits," Yates said, studying the sky with concern. "There's an old line shack about 5 miles ahead that might still be standing." They pushed their horses harder, racing against the approaching weather. The wind picked up, carrying the scent of rain and the distant rumble of thunder. They reached the line shack. Just as the first heavy drops began to fall, a small, crude structure that had once housed cowboys tending distant sections of range, now abandoned, but still offering shelter from the elements. Yates quickly saw to the horses while Clara assessed the interior. The shack was dusty but surprisingly intact, with a small iron stove, a rickety table, and a narrow cot. Clara swept away the worst of the dust and cobwebs while Yates brought in their supplies and started a fire in the stove. Outside, the storm unleashed its fury, rain lashing against the small windows and thunder cracking overhead. The close quarters made Clara acutely aware of Yates's presence as they prepared a simple meal from their provisions. "Will the storm delay Pierce's men?" Clara asked as they ate. "It might," Yates acknowledged, "but it also washes away tracks. Could be a blessing or a curse, depending on whether they've picked up our trail already." Clara nodded, trying to ignore the growing feeling of dread that had been her constant companion since fleeing Cherry Creek. "Do you think we'll make it to Dakota Territory?" Yates studied her face, clearly hearing the doubt in her voice. "I think we have a fighting chance, and that's more than you had when I pulled you from that river." Clara managed a small smile. "You're right, of course. I'm alive, which is more than Pierce intended." "And you'll stay that way," Yates promised, his voice carrying an intensity that made Clara's breath catch. As night fell and the storm continued its assault on the small cabin, they faced the awkward reality of the sleeping arrangements. The single cot was barely wide enough for one person, let alone two. "You take the cot," Yates said firmly. "I'll make do on the floor," Clara frowned. "That hardly seems fair. You need rest as much as I do." "I've slept in worse places," Yates assured her. "During the war, we considered ourselves lucky to have dry ground." Clara reluctantly agreed, settling onto the cot while Yates spread his bedroll near the stove. The sound of rain on the roof combined with the occasional crack of thunder made sleep elusive, however. She found herself watching Yates in the dim light of the banked fire, the strong profile of his face, the steady rise and fall of his chest. "You're staring again," he said quietly, turning to meet her gaze. Clara felt heat rise in her cheeks, grateful for the darkness that hid her blush. "I was just thinking." "About what?" "About how quickly life can change," she replied honestly. "A week ago I was teaching children their letters. Now I'm a fugitive, running for my life with a cowboy I barely know." Yates propped himself up on one elbow. "Do you regret it?" "Speaking up about what you saw," Clara considered the question seriously. "No," she finally said. "I couldn't have lived with myself if I'd stayed silent. Samuel Wilson deserved justice even if I never see Cherry Creek again." "That's courage," Yates said softly. "Real courage." "Or foolishness," Clara countered. "As my father used to say, the line between bravery and folly is often visible only in retrospect." "Your father sounds like a wise man." "He was," Clara agreed. "He would have liked you, I think." The intimacy of the moment hung between them, heightened by the storm raging outside and the small cocoon of warmth they'd created within. Clara found herself wanting to cross the small distance between them, to seek comfort in his arms, but propriety and uncertainty held her back. "We should try to sleep," Yates said, though he made no move to turn away. Tomorrow will bring its own challenges. Clara nodded, pulling the thin blanket closer around her shoulders. Good night, Yates. Good night, Clara. Despite her exhaustion, Clara lay awake long after Yates's breathing had deepened into sleep, listening to the storm and wondering what tomorrow would bring, and what would become of them if they survived Pierce's pursuit. The storm passed during the night, leaving behind a washed, clean world glittering with raindrops when they emerged from the line shack at dawn. Their journey resumed with a new sense of urgency as they pushed northward, keeping to high ground where they could scan the surrounding countryside for any sign of pursuit. By midday, they had crossed into Dakota territory, though Yates warned that the border would mean little to Pierce's men if they were still on their trail. They continued riding through rolling prairie dotted with stands of pine, following game trails and crossing small streams swollen with the previous night's rain. There's a settlement about 20 miles ahead, Yates informed Clara as they stopped to rest. Deadwood. It's rough, but growing fast with the gold rush. We might find help there. Or Pierce might have connections there as well, Clara pointed out. Men like him often do. Yates nodded, acknowledging the risk. True, but we need to resupply and you need a safer place to stay while I figure out our next move. Our next move, Clara repeated, focusing on his choice of words. You're still planning to stay with me? Yates met her gaze steadily. Until I know you're safe, yes. Clara felt a rush of gratitude mixed with something deeper. You've already done more than most would. Most haven't seen what powerful men like Pierce can do to those who stand in their way, Yates replied. I told you before this fight became mine the moment I pulled you from that river. They were preparing to continue when Yates suddenly tensed, his hand moving to his pistol. Clara followed his gaze to see dust rising in the distance behind them. Riders, Yates said grimly. At least 3 moving fast. Pierce's men, Clara asked, fear clutching at her heart. Can't be sure from this distance, but we can't take the chance. Yates quickly checked his gun before helping Clara onto her horse. There's a ravine about 2 miles ahead. If we can reach it, we might lose them in the rough country beyond. They rode hard, pushing their mounts to a gallop across the open prairie. Clara could feel her horse tiring beneath her, its breathing becoming labored as they pushed onward. Behind them, the riders were gaining ground, their forms becoming more distinct against the horizon. They're going to catch up, Clara called to Yates, her voice tight with fear. Just a little further, Yates urged, pointing ahead to where the land dropped away into a series of ravines and gullies carved by ancient waterways. They reached the edge of the ravine just as a shot rang out, the bullet kicking up dirt near Clara's horse. The startled animal reared, nearly throwing Clara from the saddle. Yates was at her side instantly, steadying her mount while drawing his own pistol. Down into the ravine, he ordered. Stay low and follow the bottom west. I'll be right behind you. Yates, no, Clara began, but he cut her off. Go, Clara, now. Something in his tone brooked no argument. Clara guided her horse down the steep slope into the ravine, branches whipping at her face as they descended. Behind her, she heard more shots, then Yates's answering fire. The ravine bottom was rocky but provided cover from the riders above. Clara urged her horse forward, following the natural curve of the land westward as Yates had instructed. Her heart hammered in her chest as she strained to hear what was happening above, torn between following Yates's orders and turning back to help him. The decision was made for her when Yates appeared at the top of the ravine, his horse sliding down the slope to join her. There was blood on his sleeve, Clara noted with alarm. You're hurt, she said, reaching toward him. It's nothing, Yates dismissed, though his face was tight with pain. Just a graze. I bought us some time, but they'll be coming. We need to keep moving. How many? Clara asked as they pushed forward through the increasingly narrow ravine. 4, Yates replied. I recognized 2 of them from the river. Pierce must have sent reinforcements. The ravine eventually widened into a series of interconnected gullies, creating a maze-like system that offered both protection and the risk of becoming trapped. Yates navigated with the confidence of someone familiar with the terrain, leading them through twists and turns that seemed designed to confuse their pursuers. Just when Clara thought they might have lost their hunters, they rounded a bend to find their path blocked by a recent rock slide. The pile of stone and debris reached nearly to the top of the ravine walls, impossible to climb with their horses. We'll have to go back, Clara said, turning her horse. No time, Yates replied, dismounting quickly. They're too close behind us. We need to make a stand here. Clara felt ice form in her veins at his words. A stand against 4 armed men. The ravine narrows just back there, Yates explained, helping her down from her horse. It creates a natural bottleneck. They can only come at us 1 or 2 at a time. As he spoke, Yates was already positioning himself, using the fallen rocks as cover. He checked his ammunition, his movements quick and practiced. Can you shoot? He asked Clara. She nodded, swallowing hard. My father taught me, though it's been some time. Yates handed her his spare revolver. Aim for the center of the body. Don't try for fancy shots. Clara took the gun, its weight unfamiliar and frightening in her hand. Yates, I don't want to kill anyone. His expression softened momentarily. I know, neither do I, but they're not giving us much choice. Before Clara could respond, they heard the sound of approaching hooves. Yates positioned her behind a large boulder, then took his own place several yards away, creating a crossfire position. Don't fire until I do, he instructed quietly. And Clara, if anything happens to me, don't hesitate. Ride hard for Deadwood. Clara wanted to protest, to tell him that she wouldn't leave him, but there was no time. The first of Pierce's men appeared at the bend in the ravine, rifle raised as he scanned the rockfall ahead. What happened next unfolded with terrifying speed. The man spotted Yates and shouted a warning to his companions, raising his rifle. Yates fired first, his shot catching the man in the shoulder and knocking him from his saddle. The other pursuers quickly took cover, bullets ricocheting off the rocks around Clara and Yates. Clara, stay down. Yates called as he fired again, keeping the men pinned at the bend in the ravine. Clara's hands shook as she gripped the revolver, her heart pounding so loudly she was sure it would give away her position. When one of Pierce's men tried to advance along the ravine wall, she forced herself to take aim and fire. Her shot went wide, but it was enough to send the man scrambling back to cover. The gunfight continued, a deafening exchange of bullets and shouts echoing off the ravine walls. Clara lost track of time, the world narrowing to the space between shots, the brief moments when she dared to peer around her boulder to fire at their attackers. Then, suddenly, a new sound joined the chaos hoofbeats, many of them, approaching from the direction they had been heading. Clara's heart sank, thinking Pierce had somehow managed to surround them, but Yates's expression showed surprise rather than defeat. Hold your fire, a new voice called out. This is Marshal Donovan of the Dakota Territory. Throw down your weapons. The gunfire from Pierce's men ceased abruptly. Clara risked a glance around her boulder to see several mounted men wearing badges approaching from beyond the rockslide, having apparently found a way down into the ravine from above. Pierce's men, outnumbered and caught by surprise, slowly raised their hands in surrender. You all right, miss? The marshal asked as his deputies took charge of the prisoners. He was an older man with a weathered face and sharp eyes that missed nothing. Yes, Clara managed, still clutching Yates's revolver. Thanks to Mr. Odell. The marshal turned to Yates, who had emerged from behind his cover, one hand pressed to his bleeding arm. "You want to tell me what this is all about, Odell?" Clara was surprised by the marshal's familiarity with Yates, who seemed equally taken aback by the lawman's presence. "Donovan," Yates acknowledged with a nod. "Didn't expect to find you out in this wilderness. Got word of armed men crossing into my territory with ill intent," Donovan explained. "Thought I'd investigate. Seems I arrived just in time." "These men work for Harlan Pierce," Yates explained. "Mining baron from Nevada. They're hunting Miss Valdez because she witnessed Pierce murder a man who wouldn't sell his claim." Donovan's eyebrows rose as he turned to Clara. "Is that so, madam?" Clara nodded, finding her voice. "Yes, Marshal. I saw Pierce kill Samuel Wilson 2 weeks ago in Cherry Creek, Nevada. When I tried to report it, I became a target myself." The marshal dismounted, approaching Clara with a respectful nod. "Well, Miss Valdez, it seems you've had quite an ordeal. Fortunately for you, Harlan Pierce's influence doesn't extend to Dakota territory, at least not to my office." "You'll protect her?" Yates asked, the tension in his voice evident. "That's my job," Donovan affirmed. "And it appears these men have committed enough crimes on Dakota soil to keep them occupied for quite some time." He glanced at the captured men. "Attempting to murder a woman and a former U.S. Marshal tends to be frowned upon in these parts." Clara's head snapped toward Yates. "Former U.S. Marshal." Yates had the grace to look slightly abashed. "It wasn't relevant." "Odell here was one of the best," Donovan said, clapping Yates on his uninjured shoulder. "Until he decided ranching suited him better than law enforcement." The pieces suddenly fell into place for Clara Yates's knowledge of the law, his skill with a gun, his determination to see justice done. He hadn't been just a cowboy who happened upon her by chance. He was a man who had dedicated part of his life to upholding the law. "Why didn't you tell me?" Clara asked as one of Donovan's deputies tended to Yates's wound. "Would it have mattered?" Yates countered. "Yes," Clara said simply. "It would have helped me understand you better." Their conversation was interrupted as Marshal Donovan organized his men to transport the prisoners. "We'll escort you both to Deadwood," he informed them. "You'll be safer there while we sort this out. Miss Valdez, I'll need your full statement about what happened in Nevada. Might be able to get the territorial governor to request Pierce's extradition, though that's a long shot given his influence." Clara nodded, the full weight of what had happened and what still lay ahead settling upon her. She might be safe for now, but Pierce remained free, and his reach was long. Her life in Cherry Creek was over, regardless of the outcome. As they prepared to leave the ravine, Yates approached her, his arm now properly bandaged. "You all right?" he asked quietly. Clara looked up at him, seeing him in a new light, not just as her rescuer, but as a man with his own complicated past and principles. "I'm not sure," she admitted. "Everything's happened so quickly." Yates nodded in understanding. "One day at a time, Clara. That's all any of us can do." As they rode toward Deadwood with Marshal Donovan's party, Clara found herself wondering what would happen next, and whether Yates Odell would remain by her side once the immediate danger had passed. Deadwood proved to be exactly as Yates had described, a rough mining town growing faster than its infrastructure could handle, with muddy streets lined with a chaotic mix of permanent buildings and temporary structures. Despite its rugged appearance, Clara found herself relieved to be surrounded by civilization again after days on the run. Marshal Donovan escorted them to the town's modest hotel, arranging adjacent rooms for Clara and Yates and posting a deputy outside in the hallway. "Just a precaution," he assured them. "I don't expect Pierce to have much reach this far north, but better safe than sorry." After days without proper accommodations, The simple hotel room felt like luxury to Clara. A real bed, clean linens, and the promise of hot water for bathing restored some sense of normalcy. The hotel proprietor's wife, a kind-hearted woman named Mrs. Bellamy, even provided Clara with a dress to replace her trail-worn clothing. Not exactly the latest fashion, Mrs. Bellamy apologized as Clara tried on the simple blue calico, but it should fit well enough until you can get something made. It's perfect, Clara assured her, grateful for the woman's kindness. Thank you. Later that evening, Clara joined Yates and Marshal Donovan in the hotel's small dining room to provide her formal statement. She recounted everything: Samuel Wilson's murder, her attempt to report the crime, Pierce's threats, and her subsequent flight from Cherry Creek. Donovan listened attentively, asking occasional questions but mostly allowing Clara to tell her story in her own words. "You've been through quite an ordeal, Miss Valdez," the marshal said when she had finished. "I wish I could tell you it's over, but the truth is, Pierce is a powerful man with connections throughout the territories." "What are my options?" Clara asked, facing the reality of her situation squarely. "You could testify against his men for the attack in the ravine," Donovan suggested. "That would keep them locked up for a good while. As for Pierce himself," the marshal frowned, "without corroborating evidence, it would be your word against his, and in Nevada, his word carries considerable weight." "So he gets away with murder," Clara said bitterly. "Not necessarily," Yates interjected, speaking up for the first time since the discussion began. "You mentioned a newspaper editor who has your written account," Clara nodded. "In Silver City. He promised to publish it once I was safely away." "If that account has been published," Yates continued, turning to Donovan, "it might create enough public pressure to force an investigation, especially if it coincides with the arrest of Pierce's men here." Donovan considered this. "It's possible. Public opinion can be a powerful tool against men who value their reputation." He looked thoughtfully at Clara. "Would you be willing to testify if it came to that? It would mean returning to Nevada eventually." Clara hesitated only briefly before nodding. "Yes. I came west to build a life of independence and purpose. I won't let a man like Pierce take that from me through intimidation." Yates's expression showed clear admiration, though he remained silent. "Very well," Donovan said, rising from the table. "I'll send telegrams to my counterparts in Nevada and see what's developed since you left. In the meantime, you both should rest. You're safe here for now." After Donovan departed, Clara and Yates remained at the table, the weight of the day's events settling between them. Clara studied Yates's face in the lamplight, noting the fatigue in his eyes and the careful way he held his injured arm. "You should have told me you were a marshal," she said finally, breaking the silence. Yates met her gaze steadily. "Former marshal. I left that life behind 3 years ago." "Why?" he sighed, running his hand through his hair. "Same reason I left the law: too many compromises, too many times watching guilty men walk free because they had money or influence." "Like Pierce," Clara observed. "Like Pierce," Yates agreed. "After a while it wears on a man's soul." "I decided I preferred the honesty of working with horses. They don't lie or cheat or bend the rules to suit themselves." Clara smiled slightly at that. "I can understand the appeal." Her expression grew serious again. "But you didn't hesitate to step back into that role when I needed help." "Some habits are hard to break," Yates replied with a wry smile. "Besides, you were—" He trailed off, seeming to search for the right words. "I was what?" Clara prompted softly. "Different," Yates finally said. "Most people would have kept quiet about what they saw. Self-preservation is a powerful instinct, but you risked everything for the truth, for justice." His eyes held hers. "That's rare, Clara, rarer than you might think." Clara felt warmth spread through her at his words, at the quiet admiration in his voice. "Thank you for saying that. And for everything else." They sat in comfortable silence for a moment before Yates spoke again. "What will you do now, assuming Donovan can ensure your safety?" It was a question Clara had been pondering since their arrival in Deadwood. "I'm not sure," she admitted. "I can't return to Cherry Creek, even if Pierce were somehow brought to justice. Too many people there turned their backs when I needed help." "You could stay here," Yates suggested. "Deadwood's growing fast. They'll need teachers soon enough." "Perhaps," Clara said, though she didn't sound convinced. "What about you? Will you continue to Cheyenne for the cattle auction?" Yates shook his head. "That opportunity's passed, but I'm not concerned." He hesitated before adding, "I've been thinking of making a change anyway." "What kind of change?" "I've saved enough over the years to buy a small spread of my own," Yates explained. "Nothing fancy, but enough to run a few cattle and breed some decent horses." "Where?" Clara asked, trying to ignore the hollow feeling that formed at the thought of Yates moving on with his life away from her. "There's good land north of here," he said. "The kind of country where a man could build something worthwhile." Clara nodded, forcing a smile. "That sounds like a fine ambition." They were interrupted by Mrs. Bellamy, who came to clear their plates and inform them that hot baths had been prepared in their rooms. Clara excused herself, grateful for the chance to gather her thoughts away from Yates's perceptive gaze. In the privacy of her room, as she sank into the blissful warmth of the first real bath she'd had in days, Clara found her thoughts returning to Yates. In the short time since he'd pulled her from the river, he had become more important to her than she would have thought possible. The idea of their paths diverging left an unexpected ache in her heart. The next morning brought news via telegraph. Marshal Donovan arrived at breakfast with a satisfied expression. "It seems your newspaper friend came through, Miss Valdez," he announced. "Your account was published in the Silver City Bulletin 3 days ago, along with similar statements from 2 other witnesses who came forward after you left." Clara's eyes widened. "Other witnesses?" Donovan nodded. "A bartender who overheard Pierce threatening Wilson, and a prospector who saw Pierce and his men heading to the ravine where the murder took place. Neither saw the actual killing, but their statements support your account." "And Pierce?" Yates asked. "Claiming it's all lies, of course," Donovan replied. "But the territorial governor has ordered an investigation, and Pierce's influence seems to be waning. Several business associates have distanced themselves from him since the article was published." Relief washed over Clara. "So it wasn't for nothing." "Far from it," Donovan assured her. "You've done more to bring Pierce to account than years of whispered rumors and suspicions. There's still a long road ahead, but the wheels of justice are turning." "What does this mean for Clara's safety?" Yates pressed. "She's still a key witness," Donovan acknowledged, "and Pierce still has resources. I'd recommend staying in Dakota Territory until the investigation concludes. We can provide protection if needed." Clara nodded her understanding, though the prospect of weeks or months in limbo was daunting. "Thank you, Marshal. I appreciate everything you've done." After Donovan left, Yates turned to Clara. "This is good news." "Yes," she agreed, though her smile didn't quite reach her eyes. Yates studied her face. "But," Clara sighed, "but I'm tired of my life being on hold because of Pierce. First running, now waiting." She straightened her shoulders. "I need to build something for myself, not just exist in suspended animation until the legal system decides my fate." "What are you thinking?" Yates asked. "I'm thinking I should look for teaching work here," Clara replied with determination. "Deadwood may be rough, but children still need education, and I need purpose." Yates nodded slowly. "I think that's a fine idea." "And you?" Clara asked, trying to sound casual. Will you be moving on soon to look for your ranch? A curious expression crossed Yates's face. Actually, I've been meaning to talk to you about that. He hesitated, seeming uncharacteristically uncertain. I rode out yesterday while you were resting. Spoke to a man who's looking to sell his claim about 10 miles north of here. It's good land with a decent cabin already built. That sounds promising, Clara said, ignoring the pang in her heart. I think so, Yates agreed. It would need work, of course. The cabin's basic and the fencing is poor, but the water rights are solid and there's good grazing. Clara forced herself to smile. I'm happy for you, Yates. It sounds like exactly what you've been working toward. Yates took a deep breath. The thing is, Clara, I've been thinking about something. A lot, actually. He met her gaze directly. The cabin would be small for a family, but it could be expanded, and a ranch is a lonely place without someone to share it. Clara's heart skipped a beat as she began to understand what he was saying. Yates, I know it's sudden, he continued quickly. We've only known each other a short time, but these past days have shown me what kind of person you are: brave, principled, stronger than you realize. He reached across the table to take her hand. And I find myself not wanting to imagine a future where our paths diverge. Clara's breath caught in her throat. Are you saying what I think you're saying? I'm saying I care for you, Clara, Yates replied, his voice low and earnest. More than I thought possible in such a short time. And I'm asking if you might consider a future together, not right away perhaps, but in time. When you're ready. Joy bloomed in Clara's chest, so unexpected and powerful that she felt tears spring to her eyes. I've been trying not to think about you leaving, she confessed, about going our separate ways once this is over. Hope lit Yates's eyes. Is that a yes? It's a I care for you too, Clara replied carefully, and I would like to explore what that might mean. She squeezed his hand. But Yates, my life is complicated right now. I don't know when the situation with Pierce will be resolved. I understand that, Yates assured her. I'm not proposing we rush into anything, just that we consider the possibility of a future together. Clara smiled, genuine happiness replacing the uncertainty that had weighed on her. I would like that very much. The weeks that followed brought significant changes for both Clara and Yates. True to her word, Clara approached Deadwood's town council about establishing a proper school. With the town growing rapidly and families beginning to settle, the need was evident, and Clara's credentials were impressive. Within a month, she had secured a position as Deadwood's first schoolteacher, with classes to begin once a suitable building was prepared. Yates, meanwhile, purchased the ranch he had mentioned. Though he traveled there frequently to work on improvements, he maintained rooms in Deadwood to remain close to Clara, returning to town every few days. Their courtship progressed with a natural ease that belied the dramatic circumstances of their meeting, their connection deepening with each passing day. Marshal Donovan kept them informed of developments in Nevada. Pierce had been indicted on charges of murder and conspiracy, though his lawyers were fighting vigorously to have the charges dismissed. The men captured in Dakota Territory had been convicted of attempted murder and would serve lengthy prison sentences, eliminating at least some of the threat to Clara's safety. 3 months after their arrival in Deadwood, on a crisp autumn evening, Yates invited Clara to ride out to his ranch. The cabin had been transformed from a basic shelter into a comfortable home, with new windows, sturdy furnishings, and even a small garden plot prepared for the following spring. It's wonderful, Yates, Clara said as he showed her around the property, pride evident in his voice as he pointed out the improvements and shared his plans for the future. You've accomplished so much in such a short time. There's one more thing I want to show you, Yates said, leading her to a small rise behind the cabin. There, Nestled among a stand of pines, stood a newly constructed building with large windows and a welcoming porch. Clara looked at him in confusion. Another cabin. Yates smiled, taking her hand. Not exactly. Come see. Inside, Clara found a single room fitted with rows of simple benches and tables, a larger desk at the front and a small blackboard mounted on the wall. A schoolhouse, she whispered, turning to Yates in amazement. I spoke with the families that have settled nearby, he explained. There are 8 children within riding distance who need education. Not enough for the town to build a school out here, but enough to make a difference. Yates, I don't know what to say, Clara said, deeply moved by his thoughtfulness. Say you'll marry me, Yates replied simply, taking both her hands in his. Say you'll share this life with me, teaching here during the week, helping me build this ranch into something we can be proud of. Clara's heart felt too full for words. Instead, she rose on her toes to kiss him, pouring all her answer into the gesture. When they finally parted, both breathless, she whispered, Yes. They were married 2 weeks later in Deadwood's newly built church, with Marshal Donovan standing as witness alongside Martha Jensen, who had traveled from Wyoming for the occasion. The ceremony was simple but joyful, a celebration not just of their union but of the future they would build together. The winter passed in a blur of contentment as they settled into life on the ranch. Clara's small school thrived, with children arriving on horseback or in wagons from the surrounding homesteads. Yates's careful management and hard work began to show results as spring approached, with healthy cattle and the promise of foals from his small but quality herd of mares. News from Nevada came sporadically. Pierce's trial had been delayed repeatedly through legal maneuvering, but public opinion had turned decisively against him. Several of his business partners had withdrawn their support, and his mining empire showed signs of crumbling under the weight of the scandal. On a bright morning in May, exactly 1 year after Yates had pulled Clara from the Snake River, a rider arrived at their ranch with a telegram. Clara's hands trembled slightly as she opened it, Yates's steady presence beside her providing strength. Pierce has been convicted, she read aloud, her voice thick with emotion. Second-degree murder, sentenced to 20 years. She looked up at Yates, tears of relief filling her eyes. It's over. It's really over. Yates pulled her into his arms, holding her close as the full impact of the news washed over them. You did that, he murmured into her hair. Your courage made this possible. We did it together, Clara corrected him, lifting her face to his. Everything good in my life now began the moment you pulled me from that river and said those words. You're safe on this side, Yates quoted softly. Clara smiled, placing her hand over his heart. I've been safe ever since, because the side I'm on is yours. As they stood together in the morning sunlight, the future stretching before them filled with promise, Clara marveled at how a moment of desperate flight had led to her greatest happiness. The river that had nearly claimed her life had instead carried her to a new beginning, and to the man who had become her home. 5 years later, the Odell Ranch had grown into one of the most prosperous in the region. The original cabin had been expanded into a comfortable house with a wide porch where Clara and Yates often sat in the evenings, watching their 3-year-old son, James, named after Martha's late husband, play in the yard while baby Elizabeth slept in Clara's arms. The schoolhouse had expanded as well, now serving 15 children from the surrounding area. Clara still taught there 3 days a week, with the assistance of a young woman from Deadwood who was apprenticing to become a teacher herself. Yates had developed a reputation for breeding exceptional horses, his careful selection and training drawing buyers from as far away as Cheyenne. The small herd of cattle had grown, providing a steady income to complement the horse business. On this particular evening, as the sun set over the Dakota hills, Yates joined Clara on the porch, placing a gentle hand on their daughter's downy head before sitting beside his wife. "Letter came today," he said, pulling an envelope from his pocket. "From Cherry Creek." Clara raised an eyebrow in surprise. "From whom?" "Mrs. Thornton," Yates replied, referring to Clara's former colleague. "She says the town has changed considerably since Pierce's conviction. New leadership, new opportunities." He hesitated before continuing. "They're looking for someone to establish a proper school system for the growing community." Clara was quiet for a moment, absorbing the implications. "They want me to come back," Yates nodded. "Mrs. Thornton says the town council specifically asked for you if you were willing. They're offering a good salary and complete authority over the curriculum." Clara looked out over the ranch they had built together, at their son playing with the wooden horses Yates had carved for him, at the daughter sleeping peacefully in her arms. "What do you think?" she asked softly. Yates followed her gaze. "I think we've built a good life here, but I also know that unfinished business can weigh on a person's heart." He took her hand. "If you want to consider it, I'm willing. The ranch is established enough now that we could sell it for a fair price." Clara turned to him, love swelling in her chest for this man who continued to put her needs and dreams alongside his own. "Cherry Creek was where I thought I'd build my life," she said thoughtfully. "But that was before Pierce, before the river, before you." She leaned against Yates's shoulder, feeling the solid strength that had been her constant support these past 5 years. "This is home now," she said with certainty. "This ranch, these children, I don't need to go back to Cherry Creek to finish anything." That chapter closed when Pierce was convicted. Yates pressed a kiss to her temple. "You're sure?" "Completely," Clara affirmed. "But I'll write to Mrs. Thornton. Perhaps I can help them find someone suitable. And maybe someday we'll show the children where their mother once taught. And where their father once saved a stubborn schoolteacher from drowning," Yates added with a smile. Clara laughed softly. "I wasn't stubborn, I was desperate." "You were both," Yates countered. "And brave. And the most beautiful woman I'd ever seen, even soaking wet and half drowned." "Such a flatterer," Clara teased, though a blush rose in her cheeks even after years of marriage. As twilight deepened around them and their son climbed into Yates's lap, tired from his play, Clara felt the familiar sense of gratitude that often overcame her in these quiet moments. From the chaos and danger that had driven her into that river had come this life of purpose and love, a life she could never have imagined as she fled Pierce's men that fateful day. "I love you," she said simply to Yates, the words carrying the weight of their shared journey. "And I love you," he replied, his arm tightening around her shoulders. "Always will." Together they watched as the first stars appeared in the Dakota sky, their family complete, their future secure, safe on the side they had chosen together.